When her husband was diagnosed with frontotemporal degeneration at just 29, Katie Brandt's life changed overnight. What began as confusion and heartbreak became a lifelong calling to transform how we see, support, and study dementia. Today, Katie is the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations at the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontotemporal Disorders Unit and the founder and CEO of Katie Brandt Advocacy. Today we talk about what it means to become a caregiver detective, quiet observer, the record keeper, and the advocate who pieces together the truth when something feels off. Katie shares her story, how we explore how early and accurate diagnosis brings dignity, how research becomes more human when it includes caregiver voices, and why supporting caregivers is not just compassionate, but it's strategic. And she shares the lessons she's learned through love and loss and leadership, and how her belief that love will end FTD continues to guide her work and the family she serves. Here is my interview with Katie Brandt. Katie Brandt, you are with me, and I'm so thrilled. And I've been looking forward to this day when we met, I don't know how long ago, and had this amazing conversation. And then I was able to meet you in person at the AFTD conference, which was such a gift. So thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Nicole. You are a gift to the community. And I think part of the reason why I wanted to be on your podcast is I think that we both really lead this work with our hearts. And so I felt you were a kindred spirit in the space, and I thought we could create some magic together.
I think so too. I feel that way too. You know how there's like certain people that you meet, and even though you might not have known each other very long, there's just like, yeah, like a heart connection.
Yeah,
So
the synergy. Yeah.
it is. It really
Mhm.
is. Tell us more about who you are and a story that you'd want to share, what shaped you. And I know we're going to get into more of your caregiving story, but a little bit about you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, I think the way that most people think about me is I'm the director of caregiver support services and public relations for the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit. So long, right?
Mhm.
And in that role, I have this privilege of working with families from every stage of life lived alongside a diagnosis of dementia, from the day they receive the diagnosis all the way to helping families with brain donation. And I consider myself a global advocate for families impacted by young onset dementia, Alzheimer's, and rare diseases. I did not come to this work through a job posting. In fact, the job that I have was created for me because I uh, have a deep connection through personal experience of loving and losing my late husband, who lived with behavioral variant frontal temporal dementia, frontal temporal degeneration. We'll call it FTD,
Mhm.
right, throughout the podcast. And for the past 16 years, I have been a caregiver for my dad, who is a veteran living with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinsonism, I think just some other medical challenges. And
Mhm.
I just walked in his room at his outstanding skilled nursing facility the other day, and he looked at me and said, "Hey, Kate," so he still uh, is able to communicate with me very clearly. And, I know we'll share more about my story, but the thing that I want people to think of when they think about, what's Katie Brandt doing,
Mhm.
is this idea that whether it's FTD, Alzheimer's, a rare disease that we haven't figured out how to crack the code yet, these diseases think that they are calling all the shots in our lives, in our family's stories. And I'm here to say that they will not have the final word in
Mhm.
the stories of people's families, their futures, their legacies.
Mhm.
My gift is as a storyteller, and my job is to bring the authentic voice of lived experiences to as many places as possible, to inspire
Mhm.
funders, to move policymakers, to shape research that is truly person-centered, so that we can move as fast as possible towards disease-modifying treatment and a cure.
So beautifully shared. I feel the same way, right? Of having a space where we can highlight those conversations that need to happen for people to feel encouraged and having you be able to do that and touch lives. I think there's something so powerful about hearing from those that have walked through that journey and whether it's learning, feeling encouraged, but creating awareness, right? The visibility, that the advocacy, and taking all of that and then looking at it from the place of, well, how do I have action on that, to make change. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
so important. And I think throughout the story of it, to be really clear that it's not easy.
Hmm.
And I think for sure the biggest driver in the beginning was grief,
Hmm.
because grief created a lot of energy in my life. And I
Hmm.
thought to myself, well, if I don't have somewhere to put this grief energy, it's
Hmm.
gonna seep into my friendships, my parenting, my self-confidence, my
Hmm.
self-esteem, my purpose, my ability to have an open heart to future relationships.
Hmm.
So a lot of people have said to me over the years, why? Why are you still here? Like, why
Hmm.
would you still want to be doing this? But for me, it has been very healing
Hmm.
because it feels like this is my, clap back. This is my
Hmm.
hammer against this disease that I had no power.
Hmm.
And I think I did do one talk while Mike was alive. It actually occurred, I think, the month before he passed away. I spoke to a classroom of students.
Hmm.
But all of the work that I've done has been, since he passed away. And I just want caregivers to hear there is no expectation that you are out creating jobs,
Hmm.
pounding the pavement, getting on planes when you're caring for your loved one. But we
Hmm.
want you to hear us and know that we're rooting for you.
Hmm.
We're rooting for your families. And then if your life opens up and has that space and you have that energy, we're
Hmm.
also here to help you direct it.
Mm, completely. I love how Lorenzo's house, right? We mutually love and adore them. They use that phrase dementia justice.
Yes.
And it's tied to what you were saying. What do we do with this grief that we have, the energy behind that, the driver of then pursuing justice for families and youth and people living with dementia, and the ability to feel that we can be a part of moving that forward for other people to experience the support and the what you were sharing, right? Policy and funders and research and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think about that. I love that term dementia
Mhm.
justice, and it has a duality to it to me
Mhm.
because I felt that it was so unjust what
Mhm.
happened. Like,
Mhm.
I've said before, FTD felt like this mistress that crept into bed in the middle of the night one night, and
Yeah.
it unraveled everything that Mike and I had planned for the future. I'd never heard of FTD. In
Mhm.
fact, when Mike was diagnosed at the age of 29, I was also 29. I did not know that young people could get dementia. I didn't
Right.
I didn't think that was a thing. I had grandparents that had Alzheimer's disease, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, grandmas.
Mhm.
I think my son and and my son Noah is now 17. He was a month away from his first birthday when his dad was
Mhm.
diagnosed, and he had just turned 4 when Mike passed away. And we talk about the injustice of that, right? All the
Mhm.
things that we missed out on. So there's this personal sense of injustice.
Mhm.
But what I've also noticed in my work in the community is that truly there is an injustice. In fact, I found that there is discrimination against, especially our young men that are living with behavioral
Mm,
variant FTD,
mhm,
in that programs that are used to dealing with elderly people who might be quieter, who might need less support for motor activities, who might have lower levels of energy, they fear caring for young onset dementia patients. And sometimes they're like, they won't even evaluate them. So a part of my mission in the MGHFTD unit is to bring that community education because
mhm,
I want to make sure that those doors are open
mhm,
so people can
mhm.
be considered.
There's the unknown is hard for any of us in any life situation, but specifically when it's related to our health and to not have answers and to not understand and the dismissiveness that comes, you were sharing about the discrimination. Absolutely. With your experience, it was a series of moments and a time in your life where, right, diagnosis, your son was just a baby, you lost your mom, all right, all happening. And for you with Mike, what did you notice that was changing, or how did you discover that this was something that we need to look at?
Yeah, and I think this is a great example of really trusting your gut. So
Hmm.
that'll be, a piece that I hope people take away as they're listening today. But
Hmm.
my husband Mike and I, we met in college. We had a wonderful connection and knew that we wanted to get married and start a family, and we couldn't wait to do that. In fact, we graduated from college in May and were married that August.
Oh,
Yeah, I was the only one of the two of us that had a job,
mhm,
and we had, furniture from my meme's house, and we used to really have to watch our budget every week. We
mhm,
couldn't afford cable, like all the things. We
mhm,
went to graduate school together and were really great partners.
mhm,
And so for me, the earliest symptoms that I noticed with my, wonderful, sweet, supportive husband was this feeling of withdrawal.
mhm,
And so after we hit our 5-year anniversary, and I think it was like a few days before the anniversary when I found out that, as I say, our love was too big for just people,
mhm,
and
mhm,
we knew that Noah was on the way.
mhm,
And it really was during our pregnancy that I just thought, Mike is acting so weird. Now, think about this, right? If you're a person who has never heard of FTD, you don't, I mean, it never did it cross my mind he had a progressive neurological disorder, but he would do
right.
things like oftentimes early in pregnancy, you maybe don't want to shout it from the rooftops. You want to
Mhm.
wait a little bit.
Yeah.
And I expressed that to him, but he was like telling everyone right away. And I
Mhm,
thought, gee, that's kind of out of character that Mike would
mhm,
share something about our marriage or our
mhm,
family when I'd specifically asked him not to.
mhm,
And I remember one night in the car, the room that was set to be the baby's room, I said, oh, maybe I'll change the wallpaper in there. But I was just talking about it, right? Musing. We parked the car, went in the house. He walked right upstairs to the room and just ripped a hunk of wallpaper off the wall. And I thought, well, that's not what I said, you know. And then Mike started to develop this obsession with the Harry Potter audiobooks. Now,
mhm,
we love Harry Potter. We waited in line at Borders bookstore at midnight to, I think get the sixth or seventh book, and we went to the movies and everything. And but he would listen to these audiobooks like relentlessly. He would listen to them in bed at night. He would listen to them in the kitchen. He'd listen to it in the car. And when I was in active labor with our son Noah, I said to Mike, take those earbuds out of your ears. I'm having our baby. Like,
mhm,
that is not normal, right?
mhm, mhm.
But again, it's a huge life change for two people in their late 20s to go from being a couple to now having a baby. So any strangeness that Mike was exhibiting, outsiders just attributed it to that.
Mhm.
And when Noah was, and things continued to just feel
Mhm.
off. And then when Noah was 6 months old, Mike had his annual visit with his primary care, his annual well visit with his primary care scheduled. And I was talking to my mom the night before, and I just like mentioned, oh, Mike has his doctor appointment tomorrow. So I'm going to watch the baby during my lunch break. And she said, you need to go to that appointment.
Mm.
And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I think something might be wrong with Mike's brain.
Wow.
And I can remember sitting in the driveway. Noah was asleep in the back seat in his car seat. And I said to my mom, there's nothing wrong with Mike's brain. He's just acting like a jerk.
Mm.
I said that
Yeah.
because I didn't know. And now that I have been a support group facilitator for over a decade, so many people have
Mm.
come to support group and said almost the exact statement.
That's something,
Ex-girlfriends, ex-husbands,
yeah.
right? Like adult children who were estranged. They were like, I just thought my mom didn't want me in her life anymore. I just, so I went to that appointment. I Noah was in his baby bucket car seat. I was holding him. I could think about the weight of the car
Mhm.
seat on my arm.
Mhm.
And I looked at the doctor and I said, my husband is acting so weird. Could he have a brain tumor? Because that's sort of what came to mind. I was like, oh, what? My God, what? And she said, no, I think it's just depression. And Nicole, I don't know why, but I had the deepest, darkest pit in my stomach when she said that. And the moment that she said that, I knew something was wrong with him. And I knew it was not depression. It was so weird. It was like
Mhm.
the moment I knew it wasn't that.
Mhm.
It wasn't, but I knew, uh-oh. So we went on this journey um, to 8 different medical and mental health professionals. He had a lot of tests. He stayed overnight at the hospital. He spent a week in a secure psychiatric unit. But the thing that really was a stroke of luck, and it was terrible, was my dad had been receiving care from the wonderful team in cognitive neurology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. And my mom had a follow-up appointment for my dad.
Mhm.
And a couple days before that appointment, she was like, oh, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, I got up last night to nurse Noah, and Mike wasn't in bed, and I couldn't find him. And then I found him in the basement with a little butane torch. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm going to fix the washing machine. But the washing machine wasn't broken.
Mm.
So I told the story to my mom, um, and maybe it was a Monday, and she went in, and Dad had his follow-up appointment midweek and actually he saw the chief of cognitive neurology at the time, Dr. Albert Galiberta, and
Mm.
he asked them, how are you doing otherwise? And Mom told him some things about Mike,
Wow.
and he said to her, I want to see your son-in-law on Friday morning. Call your daughter right now.
Mm.
And that Friday, we all went in. Mom, Dad, Noah, Mike, myself, my sister was there.
Mhm.
And of course, the team at Beth Israel did neuropsychological testing. In the future, they did brain scans. But that day, Dr. Galiberta said to me, this is very bad. I believe your husband has something called frontal temporal dementia, and there's no cure for it. Like he was an expert, internationally renowned
Mhm.
neurologist, and
Mhm.
he could identify right away. But think about the series of
Mhm.
events that led us there.
And not having, right? Like you said, to be lucky in having your mom with your dad and then the connection of being able to have access to the right support that you needed at that time, which is why for so many it takes so many years and misdiagnosis and heartache along the way.
Thank you for
Yeah.
listening to that, Nicole. It's always a hard story to,
Mm,
relive. It's such a
mhm,
tough time when you don't know.
mhm,
And then knowing and
mhm,
understanding, it was like a light switch for me where my whole attitude, perspective, approach, everything changed. And so when we think about dementia justice, right, going back to that, having that accurate diagnosis allowed Mike the dignity of receiving love and compassion and empathy from me
mhm,
that was very hard for me to give when I didn't know he had an illness. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know that he had lost the ability to control it.
mhm. Right. I was talking with Nancy Anderson, who, yes, and we were sharing about that their initial relationship with husband dad was you think that it's the person and there's so much anger and frustration. And she's like, when we finally had the diagnosis, we could separate the disease from husband, from dad, and just how healing that was in that way to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think actually Mike got better in a lot of
Mhm,
ways from
mhm,
that. Of course, he didn't really, right? It's degenerative.
mhm,
But you think about when your expectations change, then the person experiences a lot less frustration. So,
mhm,
right, all of a sudden it became very person-centered. And
mhm,
I do really think that becoming a mother at that time, I was so baby-centered, but it was tuning my brain to pay attention to a little human being who was communicating with me in a way that was often nonverbal. And
mhm,
I do think it set me up for success to think about, how am I making the day, building the day to support Mike? How am I building the environment? How is my approach? How is
mhm,
my response? And
mhm,
I think that that all came so naturally.
mhm,
Um, Even though I was so devastated, I was also so wanting to protect him,
mhm.
and I saw him as very vulnerable.
Oh, yes. And for those that are listening that feel frustrated with advocating for themselves or finding answers in a medical system, what would you share with them about navigating that or right when it's hard to see that full picture, have those answers?
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things that I've noticed, so having the privilege of being part of an expert clinical team in the MGH FTD unit, is that truly we do need people to be detectives,
Mm,
right? And honestly, it's typically not one thing.
mm,
So you have all these pieces. So think about your own experience with your loved one. And what you are bringing to the table is you can bring a picture about the clinical, like the history. What did this person used to be like? Like, even if you made a chart, right? If you drew a line down the center of the paper and say, my husband used to be able to cook, grocery shop and cook all the meals for our family. And now he microwaved a bagel last week for 20 minutes and it caught on fire
mhm,
and it was a disaster, right? So you
mhm,
could like line things up. You're providing this history. The clinicians will examine your loved one, right? So what happens in the office? And then there's other things like biomarkers. Is the clinician going to ask for a blood test? Are they going to ask for cerebrospinal fluid through a lumbar puncture? Are they going to look at brain images? And then they might want some neuropsych testing, which could be a short one-page form in the primary care's office to a 3-hour test with the neuropsychologist. And And then there's this other very important factor, probably the most important, which is time.
Mm-mm.
Because if somebody has, like, whatever condition they have, watching them over time gives you more information. So if Mike truly had depression, that would have played out over time in a specific way.
Right.
But because his disease was neurodegenerative, over time his functioning declined. He lost words. You know, he lost the ability to understand complex ideas and thoughts. He couldn't write.
Mhm.
That's a very different progression than from a true mental health disorder.
Right. Mm.
So I think that if your loved one has had changes to their behavior, personality, cognitive, functional
Mm.
ability, think about yourself as part of the detective team. Keep notes, whether it's a quick note on on an app on your phone, or you're literally taking a journal, you're writing journal entries, and then share those with the medical provider ahead of time with like a brief cover summary, like, I am worried about my husband. I am worried about my girlfriend.
Mhm.
And I love to point this out when we think about HIPAA and protecting the privacy and confidentiality of our loved ones who are living with these conditions.
Mhm.
HIPAA means that your loved one's healthcare provider cannot share information with you without the
Mhm.
right paperwork.
Mhm.
It always allows for the
Mhm.
clinician to receive information that they may choose to use in their clinical assessment.
Mhm.
And there are ways for you to share that information that protects your loved one's dignity. Like, many people say to me, oh, I can't tell the doctor that my husband had 3 car accidents last week because my husband will be sitting right there and he'll get so upset. You
Mhm.
can write that note and hand it to the nurse who assesses you at the beginning of the appointment. You can give it to the person who checks you in, and it's folded and right on the top. Read before entering the patient room.
Yeah.
You can write right up at the top. My loved one will become upset if we discuss these topics openly, and then just share
Mhm.
everything. Clinicians are used to that. This is
Mhm.
not new for them.
Mhm. I'm so glad that you shared that. I haven't heard that before, right? From the perspective of we just the agency to be able to share information and to find answers and support in that way, and that we can be a part of that. So I'm so appreciative of that lens and that viewpoint. And so much goes into medical, right, records and all of that. Is your recommendation that there is a POA in place and looking at, right, all of those components of that as you're navigating that?
100%. So right now, if you're 18 years of age, I
Mhm.
want you to run out and just get your boilerplate, power of attorney, healthcare proxy, like the very basic things that you have the ability to get in your state. But, oftentimes when people receive a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or FTD, what we hope, and I think things are getting better, especially getting better in some pockets.
Mhm.
We always need to respect that when people of historically marginalized populations, people who
Mhm.
live in low socioeconomic status, people with low education levels, it can be every hurdle is higher for them. So I want
Mhm.
to acknowledge that, from the get-go.
Mhm.
But when people often are diagnosed at a stage where they can still communicate their values,
Mhm.
it's very simple. If you were to ask a person living with a diagnosis, hey, if something were to happen to you and you would need help making financial decisions, who would you choose? That's typically the power of attorney.
Mhm.
And you can draw that paperwork up very inexpensively. It's very
Mhm.
inexpensive. And
Mhm.
then the second question is, oh my goodness, if something were to happen to you and you couldn't speak for yourself, who would you want to help make your healthcare decisions?
Mhm.
And that is typically called a healthcare proxy. or sometimes a healthcare power of attorney.
Mhm.
Durable power of attorney is another term that you'll hear. My biggest suggestion is contact the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, NALA. You
Mhm.
go on their website, you put in your zip code and find a certified elder law attorney in your state because the laws differ by state. But
Mm.
even though the laws and the nuance differ, those two questions, who do you need to make your legal and financial decisions, and who do you need to make your healthcare decisions? Those questions are the same for every human alive on this
Mhm.
planet.
Mhm.
And the earlier that you ask that question, the more it protects the personhood and dignity of the person living with the diagnosis, because then
Right.
they have some agency
Yeah.
in who can help make those decisions for them.
Thank you. That is so helpful. When you look at the emotional landscape of caregiving, shifting from wife, daughter to caregiver for people that you dearly love, how did you manage that? And I don't know if do we ever manage that? How did you feel with that
Yeah.
change?
Yeah, so I think, it's sort of interesting for people to hear. I of course had both these
Mm,
experiences. I have often shared that my husband was officially diagnosed with FTD, and then shockingly, 4 days later, my mom passed away from a heart attack in her sleep. And then 17 days after that, I brought dad in for an appointment with his neurology team, and they confirmed that he had Alzheimer's disease at the age of 59. So I was this 29-year-old woman
mhm,
with a husband with FTD.
mhm,
I had a son who had just turned 1 years old, and then my dad with Alzheimer's.
mhm,
And I think what I really truly felt happened organically with Mike, my husband,
mhm,
was that my love for him really grew into this fierce maternal love. And, some of it was probably connected with I became a mother at that time. So
mhm,
that ability to love was right, at the top. It was beaming out of my head and toes and fingers.
mhm,
But the other piece of it, I think, with Mike was because he lost the ability to communicate early,
mhm.
and he just was so incredibly vulnerable. So he needed someone to stand up for him, and I just felt this like need to protect him in a way that my with my dad has been more nuanced.
Mhm.
Like Mike really could not speak at all. And it wasn't just speaking. He couldn't write you a note. He couldn't, like, I remember the hospice team for Mike said to me, so, is your husband using sign language? And I was like, no, like, you don't understand. It's not that he's having trouble making words. He does not communicate. Like,
Mhm.
sign language is language, you know? But my dad, is able, I bet if somebody even said to dad now, you know, who helps you? Who do you trust? I think he would say my name. I
Mhm.
think he would understand like a simple, direct question like that.
Mhm.
So with dad, it's more like a game. Like I'm running the show, but I don't want him to see me pulling the strings,
Right.
right?
Mm.
So it's like a lot of how do I present things to dad?
Mhm.
How do I, like dad lived, was able to keep him at home full time for 7 years.
Mhm.
And I needed to go back to work.
Mhm.
And so when Noah stepped on the bus to kindergarten, I was like, man, I need help with dad so I can go back to the office.
Mhm.
Because I left work completely when everything happened with my family. And there was a local adult day health program. And because dad's a veteran, the VA was able to cover transportation and attendance. I think they started at 2 days a week.
Okay.
And I said to Dad, "Oh my gosh, Dad, there's this program that needs volunteers, and they heard that you're not working right now. And you know what? They actually have this like free transportation and they drive down our street anyway. So they said they'd be happy to pick you up."
Incredible.
And and the thing was, because Dad was like young and able-bodied,
Mhm.
he actually did help in a lot of ways. They would have him set up the chairs for bingo. They would have him carry lunch trays for people in wheelchairs. They would have him play basketball with the people who like to do that. Like,
Mhm.
and then they told me a story once of someone was touring the facility and they looked at Dad and said, "Oh, how long have you been a patient here?" And Dad said to the person, I'm not a patient, I work here."
Love that.
You know,
Oh,
but he did
that purpose.
contribute. He did
Mhm.
contribute. And so
Mhm.
we protected his dignity. I
Mhm.
know that we were not completely honest with him, but it allowed him, by protecting his dignity, we put him in a place where he was
Mhm.
safe, had support, and he could give back to the program.
Mhm. Oh, the purpose, right? There was a woman I was visiting, and she was really adamant about not having anyone come in her home, and was living with dementia. And uh, I stopped by, and my son was really young at the time. I was home with him at that time. And I knocked on the door and I said, "I know your granddaughter, but I am lonely and I really need someone to keep me company. Could you visit with me a couple days a week? I'd really like a friend." And she welcomed that. It was the shifting it to, we all want to feel valued and have purpose and feel needed, right? And so
Yeah.
I love that you were able to do that. It's incredible.
I think that need to be needed to provide
Mhm.
help, I think that stays with
Mhm.
us for a very long time.
Mhm. I think it does too. It does. You shared about vaccinating caregivers, right? Protecting them from isolation and burnout, and specifically, right, that financial devastation. How do we do that in practice? What does that mean? We know that caregiving comes with so many invisible costs of career and the life that we once thought that we were going to live, and our health, all of that.
Well, I think it begins by validating. I want our family caregivers to hear that there is real data that tells us that being a family caregiver is a threat to your physical, emotional, and financial well-being.
Mhm.
And think about this, right? Alzheimer's and FTD are not contagious diseases, yet the people who are closest to the person living with the diagnosis can, in fact, become sick.
Mhm.
How? Why?
Mhm.
Well, family caregivers of loved ones living with dementia can be more likely to experience chronic conditions due to stress. They're more likely to have cardiac issues. They're more likely to experience substance abuse. In some cases, they're even more likely to have higher mortality rates.
Mhm.
And when we think about what is it that caregivers are experiencing that may lead to these health outcomes, very specifically, when we think about caregivers, it's hard for them to have respite.
Right.
So, what I've noticed is that when a caregiver has that respite time, they're doing the things that must be done first.
Mm.
They're focused on survival. Now, you might not think that going to your annual well visit, getting a mammogram screening, having a colonoscopy is
Mm.
part of survival because you think, well, nothing's really wrong right now. I can put that off. But
Mm.
having those preventative well checkups are the things that can vaccinate us against illness later. So I think in a very practical sense,
Mhm.
Endorsing to caregivers that when you are creating a person-centered care plan for your loved one, you must include yourself on the list because you are pivotal to the quality of care that your loved one receives.
Mhm.
So that in fact, hiring someone or asking a family member, I need you to come and stay with my loved one twice a month so that I can go to a mental health appointment.
Mhm.
I just booked my primary, my annual well visit with my primary care. Can you add it to your calendar that you'll stay with my loved one so I can go to that appointment?
Yeah.
And that this is, in fact, required to keep your loved one healthy and well.
Mhm.
So, really knowing that this is not a selfish act, that this is an act of care.
Mhm.
Caring for yourself cares for your loved one.
Mhm.
And then I think the second piece is that we know that family caregivers of loved ones living with dementia are an increased risk for loneliness due to isolation.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that came out of COVID times was that we have a much wider ability now to connect virtually.
Right.
In fact, I co-facilitate an FTD caregiver support group with my amazing
Mhm.
co-facilitators, Amy Almeida and Bernie Metzger, where we welcome caregivers every week for an hour on Zoom. And I have seen real relationships and connections and care blossom over people that have never touched hands.
Mhm. Mhm.
So my number one suggestion to people would be if you're if you have a diagnosis or your loved one has a diagnosis, go to your patient advocacy organization, go to the Alzheimer's Association, go to the Lewy Body Dementia Association, go to the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration and
Mhm.
find out where is that support group that I can attend.
Mhm.
So for some people, they can get in their car and they can go to an in-person. Others need an online. Make that a part of your must-haves
Yeah.
because these diseases want to keep you isolated, the nature of them. And that allows for more illness to creep in.
It does. I'm really glad you spoke to the immense health, mental, spiritual, financial that does impact. There is data and it is alarming and it's vital to address it, to talk about it, and then to set up a support system while you're navigating that.
And I think, it's hard to talk about to the financial impact. And so I think there is not an easy answer or protection.
Mhm.
But what I would say to family caregivers is as soon as you are able, as fast as you are able after a diagnosis,
Mhm.
meet with that elder law attorney and be very open about your current financial life and about your or your loved one's diagnosis and and then have a discussion about what you think you might need, what you
Right.
think might come down the pike. Because I've heard caregivers say, well, I can't get help at home because I can't afford it. And they don't realize that they may actually even be eligible for
Mhm.
programs or support, or
Mhm.
that there could be a way to restructure their finances so that if and when their loved one needs skilled nursing care, that could be made possible. I just
Mhm.
want to strongly encourage family caregivers, don't listen to your cousin or your
Mhm.
neighbor. Talk with an elder law attorney about your specific financial situation
Mhm.
because everyone's is different.
Oh, completely. And looking at young onset, right? Those unique challenges that come with that, even more so to have those professionals step in with your work, right? Mass General, uh, the National Alzheimer's Project Advisory Council, and different organizations. Part of the change, looking at research, having it be more person centered expand on the importance of having those caregiver voices included in that research and policy? Because I think that is where the shift to then support all of those other pieces that we were just talking about.
Exactly. I'll give an example. So, when I was in my deepest days of caregiving,
Mhm.
my best friend noticed that I was going to the grocery store like sometimes 4 or 5 times a week.
Mhm.
And she was like, "What are you doing? Why can't you just go to the grocery store on Sunday and just buy your food and plan for the week?"
Yeah.
And I was like, the reason why I can't do that is because every day is like triage. I would wake up and, I just felt like someone's going to have a fall. Someone's going to
Mhm.
be acting like maybe they have an ear infection or a UTI. Maybe there's going to be a blow up with Mike's insurance. And now I'm on the phone for 94 minutes trying to untangle a mess.
Mhm.
I felt like every morning I woke up and I was like, okay, who needs me the most today? What am I going to get done to make it to bedtime?
Mhm.
There is no space for a caregiver that is that stressed
Mhm.
to think about adding in doing 75 minutes worth of online questionnaires. There's no space to think about, well, I guess I'll take my loved one for this extra research MRI that's
Mhm.
2 hours away. You know, I think what we need to do is think about how caregiver support, family support is actually an opportunity for research engagement and research retention.
Wow. Yes.
So, when we think about our young onset families, there was this study funded by the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration, AFTD,
Mhm.
led by Dr. Jim Galvin, that looked at the cost of caring for a loved one with dementia. And they found that the cost of caring for a young onset, like an FTD, can be
Mhm.
almost twice that of a typical Alzheimer's disease.
Mhm.
And you might say, what? Why? What do you mean? Well, think about it. A typical Alzheimer's disease onset is around early 70s.
Mhm.
But the typical age of onset, now Mike was such a crazy outlier at 29.
Wow.
But a typical age of onset for FTD or young onset dementia would be like early 50s.
Mhm.
If you're in your late 70s and you're lucky enough to have a partner, you and your
Mhm.
partner are probably retired or semi-retired.
Yeah.
Maybe you've paid off your mortgage, maybe you've downsized. You probably don't have minor children in the home that you're financially responsible for.
Mhm.
But if you're 50 and you get diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's or FTD, you are probably at the peak of your career.
Yeah.
You could have kids who are about to launch to college. You could be caring for an aging parent. So what happens is when I work with those caregivers, so you've got a household that might have two full incomes coming in. Now, one income is erased, and in order for that second partner to keep working, which probably means contributing to their retirement, keeping the health insurance, in order for that person to keep working, they now have to hire someone,
Mm.
and the hiring someone might be as extreme as they have to hire them for 50 hours a week, which would barely cover. That would be like a 30-minute commute to work,
Yeah.
working full
The work
time,
day.
right? Like I had a caregiver who told me that once a week he skipped his lunch hour so that on the way home from work, he could leave work a little early so he could race through the grocery store to like get everything that they needed and then be home to, let release the caregiver so he didn't have to pay for an extra hour. And I thought, so this is what's required? A caregiver needs to be hungry at
Mhm.
work in order to make it through their day. Like just so much pressure,
So much.
right? So like a young onset caregiver, in order to help their loved one participate in research, they might need nighttime or weekend appointments. They might need a home visit from a study nurse to complete as much of the appointment as possible. They
Mm-hmm.
might need an extra stipend to cover childcare so that they could take their loved one. Like, I think we just have to be open-minded about what is actually required for people to
Mm-hmm.
give in such an incredible way to research that is necessary to bring us to disease-modifying therapies.
Absolutely. Are you finding that there's an openness to adapting to what is needed?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good, good.
I'm just so touched by the compassion and care that I see from the life science community
Mm-hmm.
and, of course, our academic researchers as well. And I'm privileged that through my work, I own a small consultancy, Katie Brandt Advocacy, LLC. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm able to go out and give presentations and trainings and talks to folks who are working in these spaces to just bring their awareness. Like if you meet a bench scientist, they may actually have never, they might not know. They may have never worked with a patient. They might not have had a loved one with this condition. And if you say things like, wow, are there any, could that blood work be done by a home nurse? Like that could change everything about the protocol that they write and just make it easier for people to participate.
Do you feel that there is the awareness or any gaps between having scientific progress and research and then the needs of the day-to-day families?
I think it might be like a step before. I think the gap
Mm,
and the need is we
mhm,
need more early and accurate diagnosis.
mm,
Because the life science companies and the researchers, they ask me, like, oh, where are the people?
mhm,
Right? And so I think the first step is we have to think about how can we educate our healthcare workforce to identify that people may in fact have these conditions.
right.
And then to empower families to say, to not say to a family, oh, let's watch it for 6 months. Let's watch it. I'll see you next year. Let's say, hey, I think it
Mhm,
might be this. And to let those people know, did you know that there's potentially research you can participate in? And in a very simple way, sending them to the Alzheimer's Association's trial match program, sending them
mhm,
to the FTD disorders registry so
mhm,
that they can be screened to see if they're appropriate for research. But think about it, you can never volunteer to be a research participant if you don't know what you have. If someone, I don't want
for
someone to get
sure.
diagnosed with dementia. I want them to get diagnosed with FTD, Lewy body, Alzheimer's disease, so they know what organization they should be connecting with, what
Mhm,
research might be appropriate for them.
mhm. Absolutely. There was words that you shared where you talk about just because dementia came in doesn't, or just because dementia came in, joy doesn't have to go out. And for you, right, finding joy in the midst of that grief as an extension of that, right, all of the love that you had in your life with Mike, but now you've got this ongoing love story. And tell us more about defining that joy and what that looks like for you now.
Absolutely. Well, when I think of it during the caregiving days, I just have to give a huge shout out to the staff and the professional caregivers that supported and loved our family
Mhm,
because when when I needed more support and I found a skilled nursing facility to care for Mike, it allowed me, with the support of that staff, only because of the support of that staff,
mm,
to focus on being a wife and a mother. And I could bring Noah to the nursing home and we could have these visits where we would blow bubbles together and eat snacks together. And the clinician would, the nursing home assigned a staff person to all of our family visits. Family time was the number one goal on Mike's care plan.
incredible.
And so at every visit, I would just give my camera to whichever staff person was with us that day, and they would just take pictures of us while we were visiting. And they would help facilitate the visit in a safe way. And you know what? those visits were usually short, but
Mhm.
I focused on what moment of connection are we going to have? And I was determined that even though this terrible thing was happening in the background, that it didn't get to steal every moment of joy and connection. And I think that that outlook,
Mhm.
when I became a widow at 32,
Mhm.
I just thought, I don't know how, but I would really love for the love story of my life to continue.
Mhm.
And, I have this wonderful, amazing partner, Greg, and we're getting married next summer. It's
So
just over the moon. Yes.
congratulations.
Thank you.
So happy.
And Greg, unfortunately, is part of the, you know, I guess the club that none of us want to be a part
Mhm.
of, right? He's a widower
Mhm.
as well. And for both of us, I think the wonderful, unexpected joy of falling in love with each other was that loving Greg did not require that I change my love for Mike.
Mhm.
For for Greg, loving his wife did not have to change in order to love me. And that was something that I never would have known had I not been open to the experience of being in relationship with someone again.
Right, right. And how you beautifully shared the love story of your life, right? So I think hopeful to have you share that, as a lot of us experience loss, and knowing that there is resilience and joy on the other side of that, as hard as it is to see it in those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, why it just came to me like an epiphany
Mm,
that, the statement that I shared at the end of my AFTD keynote, which is
mhm,
I really believe that love will
mhm,
end FTD. And for me, so much more than anger or injustice or depression or grief,
mhm,
love has been the gas in my tank.
mhm,
And I find that putting love first, I know this
mhm,
sounds corny, right? It
mhm,
does, but it's so much more powerful for me. It has been so much more powerful as a driver, you know, than anything else. And I
mhm,
think it also, love is flexible.
mhm,
And it allows you to show up however you are. So you can be angry that you lost your loved one. You can feel frustrated that the system doesn't offer you the support that you need. But
mhm.
love can still be there to lead you in what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
I just want to say to be sensitive to all relationships that
Mhm,
people have. And if you have a complicated relationship with the
mhm,
person that you care for, I want you to know that the love that you feel can actually be directed towards yourself. And you can make caregiver decisions. Maybe you can't be the hands-on caregiver for your loved one or for the person that you're caring for. Maybe you need a
mhm,
team, but you're directing the team, you're advocating. And
mhm,
that is, in fact, a way to fulfill your caregiver role. And it's a way to show love for yourself in
mhm.
this caregiving experience.
When you share that, I loved that. The love will end FTD. How can we be a part of that movement, connect with you, support the work that you're doing?
We want to have justice in that. So
Mhm,
my goal, I call on your community to think about, help me use my gift, which I think is being a communicator and a storyteller. And I
mhm,
want to bring my voice to illuminate the authentic experience, the lived experience, the impact of young onset dementia, the impact of Alzheimer's, the impact of rare disease. So if you have a space where you think that my voice can be helpful, go to katiebrandt.org and connect with me.
Love that. Thank you. And you also have a podcast,
Oh, yes. Yeah, I
right?
have a
Tell us
podcast. I do.
about that.
Oh my gosh, the podcast has been like a dream for years. And then this year we're like, we gotta do it. So,
Yeah.
From Care to Cure is an amazing podcast from the MGH FTD unit. Our producer is Amy Almeida. She is incredible. And I'm honored to be the host. And season one is a deep dive of all of these conversations that I have with the director of the FTD unit, which is Dr. Brad Dickerson. He's a
Mm,
world-renowned neuroscientist. He's an incredibly compassionate clinician. And I think that one of the main reasons why I wanted this podcast to happen was I wanted his voice, his ability to explain things in a way
mm,
that's understandable, person-centered, compassionate, and complete, right?
mm.
That accurate information. I wanted to bring his voice to everyone. So you can find us from Care to Cure. We're on Apple and Spotify, and we'd love for you to like, follow, and listen.
Amazing. We'll include your website and all of those links in the episode description so people listening can find and have access to that. Katie, thank you. I feel like I spent this time, this hour, just soaking in your compassion, nodding my head, saying, "Wow," and I know everyone listening will feel the same way and just so supported by you. So thank you for everything you do, how you encourage us, the change that is being made as in our global world because of your advocacy and your voice. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for being a vessel for this and for having your podcast and your work as a way to bring that heart-centered work out into the world. We all need it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.